The first thing everyone noticed about her was her size. Big, soft-looking, slow-moving, the kind of inmate predators circled like vultures. When the new inmate walked into cell block C, the gang at the back table didn't even bother whispering. "Look at that whale," their leader laughed. "Bet she won't last a week." By lunch, they had already chosen her as their entertainment. 4 gang members cornered her in the cafeteria, shoving her tray out of her hands, laughing as food splattered across her shirt. But she didn't yell, didn't swing back, didn't even blink. She just looked down at the floor, breathing, slow, controlled, measured, like a woman counting seconds. The gang didn't notice her knuckles, scarred, or the tattoo half hidden under her sleeve. Not a prison tat, a special operations mark most people will never recognize. And when the biggest gang member tried to grab her by the collar, the entire cafeteria watched a miracle of violence unfold. Because the woman they thought was harmless moved with the deadly precision of someone who once stormed enemy compounds in the dark. And within 10 seconds, everyone in that cafeteria realized they hadn't picked on a weak inmate. They had just started a war with a former Marine raider, trained to end fights before they begin. Stay with me until the end, because what this woman does next will change the hierarchy of the entire prison overnight. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now let's get into it. Diana Rivera had been inside Riverside Women's Correctional for exactly 48 hours when the Savage sisters decided she was their newest target. The heavy-set 41-year-old moved through the yard with deliberate steps, her weathered face showing no emotion as inmates sized her up from every corner. What they saw was exactly what Diana wanted them to see. A tired, middle-aged woman carrying extra weight around her midsection, moving like someone who'd given up fighting long ago. Her shoulders slumped forward in apparent defeat, and her eyes stayed fixed on the ground ahead of her. The Savage Sisters leader, Rochelle Reyes Johnson, watched from her usual spot near the weight pit. Reyes had been running operations in Cell Block C for 5 years, and her reputation for brutal efficiency kept even the guards nervous. Her dark skin was covered in elaborate tattoos that told stories of violence and survival. "Fresh meat," Reyes announced to her crew, nodding toward Diana. "Big girl looks like she's carrying some commissary money too. Time to collect our welcome tax." Her lieutenants, 3 hardened criminals with dead eyes and scarred faces, grinned with anticipation. They'd performed this routine dozens of times before. New inmates, especially quiet ones who looked soft, learned quickly that Reyes' crew controlled everything that mattered in Cell Block C. But Diana Rivera wasn't just any new inmate. 23 years earlier, she'd graduated from the Marine Corps School of Infantry as the top marksman in her class. By age 22, she was conducting classified operations in places that didn't officially exist on any map. The Marines had taken a girl from the border towns of Texas and forged her into something deadlier than anyone in this prison could imagine. The Marine Raiders had taught her to read environments, assess threats, and neutralize enemies with surgical precision. More importantly, they taught her patience. How to wait, how to watch, how to let her opponents reveal their weaknesses before striking. That afternoon in the commissary, Diana deliberately chose items that would make her appear vulnerable. Expensive toiletries, candy bars, and other luxury items that screamed easy target to predators. She paid with crisp bills from her booking money, making sure Reyes' crew could see exactly how much cash she carried. The trap was set. During evening chow, Diana selected a table in the far corner of the cafeteria. She sat alone, methodically eating her meal while keeping her peripheral vision locked on Reyes' crew 3 tables away. They whispered and pointed, their body language broadcasting their intentions to anyone who knew how to read tactical situations. Diana finished her green beans first, then her mashed potatoes, then her mystery meat, chewing each bite with the same measured rhythm she'd once used to control her breathing during sniper missions. Everything about her demeanor suggested a woman trying to stay invisible. Reyes made her move during the final 10 minutes of dinner service. The 4 gang members approached Diana's table in a diamond formation. Reyes directly ahead, 2 flankers on either side, and 1 trailing behind to cut off retreat routes. It was amateur hour tactical positioning, but effective enough against most inmates. "You sitting in our spot, bitch," Reyes announced, her voice carrying across nearby tables. Conversation stopped as other inmates turned to watch the entertainment. Diana continued chewing, her dark eyes never leaving her tray. The silence stretched for several seconds before Reyes slammed her palm down on the metal table. "I said, you're in our spot." Still no response from Diana. She reached for her milk carton with movements so slow they seemed almost meditative. Other inmates began backing away from surrounding tables, sensing violence approaching like an incoming storm. Reyes' face twisted with anger and embarrassment. In prison, respect was currency, and this fat newcomer was making her look weak in front of witnesses. She grabbed Diana's food tray and hurled it across the table, sending beans and potatoes flying across Diana's orange jumpsuit. The cafeteria fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Diana finally looked up, her brown eyes meeting Reyes' for the first time. What Reyes saw there should have been her first warning. These weren't the eyes of a frightened inmate. They were the eyes of a predator who'd been waiting for this exact moment. "You got something to say now, fat bitch?" Reyes sneered, leaning forward until her face was inches from Diana's. Diana stood up slowly, her considerable bulk unfolding from the bench seat. At 5'9" and 250 pounds, she was solidly built, but her movements remained unhurried, almost lazy. "Apologize," Diana said quietly. Reyes blinked, certain she'd misheard. "What did you say?" "Apologize for the disrespect, and we can both walk away from this." The entire cafeteria erupted in laughter. Even some of the guards chuckled at what seemed like the most ridiculous request in prison history. Reyes' crew slapped each other's backs, enjoying the comedy show. But Diana wasn't joking. She was offering Reyes one final opportunity to de-escalate before the real violence began. It was a courtesy she'd learned to extend even to enemy combatants overseas, give them a chance to surrender before the shooting started. Reyes reached for Diana's collar, intending to slam her back down into her seat. It was exactly the move Diana had been waiting for. What happened next took less than 3 seconds, but those 3 seconds would be replayed in prison stories for years to come. Diana's left hand moved first, intercepting Reyes' reaching arm with a grip that crushed bone against bone. The gang leader's confident sneer vanished as she felt her wrist trapped in what felt like a steel vise. Before Reyes could process what was happening, Diana pivoted on her right foot and drove her elbow upward into Reyes' solar plexus with surgical precision. The strike landed exactly where Diana intended, hitting the cluster of nerves that would paralyze her opponent's diaphragm without causing permanent damage. Reyes' breath exploded from her lungs in a wet gasp as she doubled over, her face contorting in agony. But Diana wasn't finished. She shifted Reyes' weight forward and swept her legs, sending the gang leader crashing face first into the cafeteria table with a sickening thud. The entire sequence looked effortless, like Diana was simply helping Reyes sit down. But every inmate in that cafeteria recognized lethal efficiency when they saw it. Reyes' 3 lieutenants stood frozen, their mouths hanging open as their supposedly invincible leader writhed on the floor, clutching her ribs and gasping like a fish out of water. They'd expected their victim to cower, maybe throw a wild punch or two before getting beaten down. They hadn't expected to witness a textbook demonstration of close-quarters combat. Diana calmly reached down and retrieved her milk carton from the floor, taking a slow sip while Reyes struggled to remember how breathing worked. The silence in the cafeteria was absolute except for Reyes' labored wheezing. "Like I said," Diana spoke quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the dead silence. "Apologize for the disrespect." One of Reyes' crew members, a scarred woman named Keisha, finally found her voice. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life. You have no idea who you're messing with." Diana turned her attention to Keisha, and the younger woman immediately took a step backward. There was something in Diana's eyes that triggered every survival instinct Keisha had developed during her 12 years inside. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Diana replied, her tone conversational. "Small-time prison gang thinks they run the yard because nobody's challenged them lately. Amateur hour intimidation tactics. Sloppy formation when approaching a target. Poor situational awareness." She gestured toward Reyes, who was slowly pushing herself up to her knees, blood trickling from her nose where it had connected with the table edge. "Your leader just learned that size and reputation don't mean much against proper training. Question is whether the rest of you are smart enough to learn from her mistake. The guards had noticed the commotion by now, but they made no move to intervene. Prison fights were part of the daily routine, and as long as nobody pulled weapons or tried to kill anyone, they usually let things play out naturally. Besides, seeing Rays get humbled was probably entertainment for them too. Word spread through cell block C faster than wildfire. By the time evening count was called, every inmate knew that the new woman had put Rays Johnson on her back in under 3 seconds. The story grew with each telling, but the core facts remained consistent. Diana returned to her cell and sat on her thin mattress, reading a paperback novel as if nothing had happened. Her cellmate, a nervous young woman named Ashley doing time for drug possession, watched her with wide eyes. "Girl, you just signed your death warrant," Ashley whispered. "Rays has connections all over this place. They're going to come for you with numbers." Diana turned a page in her book without looking up. "Let them come. You don't understand. They'll get you in the showers or the library or during yard time. They'll wait until you're isolated and then—" "Ashley," Diana interrupted gently, "I appreciate the concern, but I've been dealing with people who want to kill me since before you were born. Prison gangs don't scare me." What Ashley didn't know was that Diana had already identified 17 different tactical positions throughout cell block C where she could establish defensive superiority if attacked. She'd mapped guard patrol patterns, noted which inmates were affiliated with which gangs, and calculated response times for various emergency scenarios. The Marine Raiders had trained her to treat every environment as a potential battlefield, and Riverside Women's Correctional was just another area of operations that required assessment and planning. That night, as most inmates settled into their bunks, Rays held court in the common area with her remaining credible muscle. Her nose was swollen, and both eyes were developing spectacular bruises, but her pride had taken more damage than her face. "We hit her tomorrow during yard time," Rays wheezed, her voice still rough from the solar plexus strike. "Get her isolated near the fence, away from the guards. I want her to understand what happens when you disrespect the Savage Sisters." Her crew nodded eagerly, but several veteran inmates who overheard the conversation exchanged knowing glances. They'd seen newcomers surprise established powers before, and it rarely ended well for the established powers. Diana Rivera had just announced her presence in cell block C with a demonstration of controlled violence that left no doubt about her capabilities. The question wasn't whether Rays would try to retaliate. The question was whether Rays and her crew would survive their next encounter with a woman who'd spent 2 decades perfecting the art of combat. As lights out was called and the cell block settled into uneasy quiet, Diana lay on her bunk staring at the ceiling. She wasn't thinking about tomorrow's inevitable confrontation. She was thinking about the chain of events that had led her to this place. The Marines had given her purpose, discipline, and deadly skills. But civilian life had been harder to navigate than any battlefield she'd ever seen. Jobs that felt meaningless after years of life-or-death missions, relationships that couldn't survive her emotional walls, alcohol that numbed the memories but created new problems. The arrest had been almost a relief. Aggravated assault charges for putting 3 gang members in the hospital after they'd tried to assault her teenage niece outside a San Antonio convenience store. Her public defender had pushed for a plea deal, and Diana had accepted 22 months rather than risk a longer sentence at trial. But sitting in the cell, listening to Ashley's nervous breathing and the distant sounds of inmates settling in for the night, Diana realized something important. For the first time in years, she felt like herself again. The woman who'd once led raids into hostile territory, who'd made split-second decisions that saved lives, who'd earned the respect of the most elite warriors in the world. Rays Johnson and her crew thought they were hunting prey. They had no idea they just awakened a predator who'd been dormant too long. The next morning arrived with the metallic clang of cell doors opening for breakfast count. Diana moved through her routine with the same methodical precision she'd used overseas. Push-ups, sit-ups, stretching exercises that kept her body combat-ready despite the limitations of her 6x8 cell. Ashley watched nervously as Diana performed movements that looked more like military drills than prison workouts. "Girl, you sure you don't want to stay in today? Maybe talk to the warden about protective custody." Diana folded her blanket with sharp creases that would have passed inspection at Paris Island. Running never solved anything. Besides, they need to understand the new rules. What Ashley couldn't see was the tactical assessment happening behind Diana's calm exterior. Every muscle movement, every breath, every mental calculation was preparing for what military strategists called inevitable contact with hostile forces. During breakfast, the tension in the cafeteria was thick enough to cut with a knife. Reyes sat at her usual table, her face a rainbow of purple and yellow bruises, whispering urgently to a larger group than usual. Word had spread beyond Cell Block C, and now representatives from other gangs watched the drama unfold. Diana selected her usual corner table, but this time she wasn't alone. 3 older inmates had positioned themselves nearby, veterans of the prison system who recognized real danger when they saw it. "Name's Big Martha," the largest of the 3 said quietly, sliding onto the bench across from Diana. "Been watching how you carry yourself. Military?" Diana nodded slightly, never taking her eyes off Reyes' expanding crew. "Marines. Army. 2 tours in Iraq before this place became home." Big Martha's weathered face carried scars that spoke of battles, both foreign and domestic. "That girl Reyes has been running her mouth all night, talking about making an example." "How many you count?" Diana asked, methodically eating her eggs. 14 of her own crew, plus some hired muscle from the Latin Queens. They're planning something for yard time. Big Martha leaned forward. "Question is, you planning to handle this alone, or you want some backup?" Diana considered the offer carefully. In her Marine unit, no mission was ever conducted solo, but accepting help from other inmates would create obligations, debts that could complicate her remaining time inside. "I appreciate the offer," Diana said finally, "but this stays between me and Reyes. Don't want to drag good women into something that's already settled." Big Martha studied Diana's face, recognizing the quiet confidence of someone who'd faced worse odds and survived. "Your call, Marine, but know that some of us got your back, whether you ask for it or not." 2 hours later, the yard gates opened for morning recreation time. The November air was crisp, and most inmates headed for the basketball courts or exercise area. Diana walked slowly toward the far end of the yard, where a chain-link fence separated the prison from the outside world. She'd chosen this position deliberately. Open ground behind her, clear sight lines in all directions, and multiple escape routes if things went sideways. It was classic Marine doctrine: control the terrain, control the battle. Reyes appeared with her expanded crew, moving in a loose formation that suggested some tactical planning. The Latin Queen's muscle flanked wide to cut off retreat routes, while Reyes' core Savage Sisters members approached directly. 19 women total, all carrying makeshift weapons hidden in their waistbands. Other inmates began backing away from the area, sensing violence approaching. Even the guards in the towers turned their attention toward the developing situation, though prison protocol required them to let inmates settle their own disputes unless weapons appeared. "Time to finish what you started, fat bitch," Reyes called out when her crew was 50 feet away. Her voice carried across the yard, ensuring maximum witnesses for what she planned to be Diana's public humiliation. Diana stood perfectly still, her hands at her sides, breathing controlled and steady. To casual observers, she looked like a woman preparing to surrender, but anyone with combat experience would have recognized the stance of a warrior choosing her moment. "Last chance to apologize," Diana said calmly as the circle tightened around her. Reyes laughed, the sound harsh and ugly. "Only thing I'm sorry about is not putting you down yesterday. But we're going to fix that mistake right now." The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously. Reyes' signal was subtle, but Diana had been watching for it. The moment Reyes' right shoulder dipped slightly, Diana was already moving. The first attacker, a wiry woman with a sharpened toothbrush, lunged forward, aiming for Diana's ribs. Diana sidestepped the thrust and grabbed the woman's wrist, using her forward momentum to drive her face first into the chain-link fence. The makeshift weapon clattered away as the attacker slumped to the ground, unconscious. The second woman tried to grab Diana from behind, but Diana had already pivoted, driving her elbow backward into the attacker's solar plexus with bone-crushing force. The woman doubled over, gasping, and Diana finished her with a knee strike to the face that sent blood spraying across the concrete. The entire sequence took less than 5 seconds, and suddenly Reyes' numerical advantage didn't look quite so overwhelming. "Take her down!" Reyes screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. The remaining attackers rushed forward in a disorganized mob, exactly what Diana had been hoping for. Years of close-quarters combat training had taught her that multiple opponents were most vulnerable when they clustered together, interfering with each other's movements. Diana moved through the group like a force of nature, her strikes precise and economical. A throat punch here, a leg sweep there, an elbow to the temple that dropped a woman like a stone. Each movement flowed into the next with deadly choreography that left opponents unconscious or writhing in pain. The Latin Queen's muscle, who'd been confident about overwhelming one woman, found themselves facing something they'd never encountered before. This wasn't prison brawling or street fighting. This was military combat refined through years of training and real-world application. Within 30 seconds, 10 women lay groaning on the concrete. The remaining attackers hesitated, suddenly uncertain about their chances against a woman who moved like violence incarnate. Reyes pulled a sharpened piece of metal from her waistband, her face twisted with rage and fear. "Come on then, Marine. Let's see how tough you are when it's just you and me." Diana smiled for the first time since the fight began. This was what she'd been waiting for. One-on-one. No distractions, just pure skill against desperation. Reyes charged forward, swinging her improvised blade in wild arcs that telegraphed her intentions from miles away. Diana waited until the last possible second, then stepped inside Reyes' reach and caught her weapon arm at the wrist. The bone snapped with an audible crack that echoed across the yard. Reyes' scream was cut short as Diana drove her knee upward into Reyes' ribcage, lifting the smaller woman completely off her feet. The makeshift weapon spun away across the concrete as Reyes collapsed in a heap. The entire yard had gone silent except for the groans of injured women and Reyes' labored breathing. Guards were finally moving toward the scene, but they took their time, letting the situation resolve itself naturally. Diana stood over Reyes' writhing form, her orange jumpsuit barely wrinkled despite the violence. Her breathing remained steady, controlled, like a woman who just finished a light workout rather than dismantling 19 opponents. "Anybody else want to discuss disrespect?" Diana asked quietly, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. The remaining gang members backed away, their hands visible and empty. The message was crystal clear. The old hierarchy was dead, and a new apex predator had claimed the territory. Big Martha approached slowly, her weathered face split by a wide grin. "Damn, Marine. Haven't seen anything like that since my army days. Where'd you learn to move like that?" "Fallujah, Helmand Province. Places where hesitation got you killed," Diana replied, watching as medical staff rushed onto the yard to tend to the injured. Reyes was loaded onto a stretcher, her arm bent at an unnatural angle, and her face a mask of pain and defeat. As they carried her past Diana, she managed to whisper through gritted teeth, "This ain't over." Diana leaned down until her face was inches from Reyes'. "Yes, it is. And if you're smart, you'll remember that every day for the rest of your sentence." The aftermath was swift and decisive. Reyes and 7 of her crew were transferred to the medical wing, then to administrative segregation pending investigation. The Latin Queen's muscle disappeared back into the general population, suddenly uninterested in any further conflict with the new woman. By evening count, stories of the yard fight had spread throughout the entire prison complex. Each telling added new details, but the core facts remained consistent. The quiet new inmate had single-handedly dismantled the most feared gang in Cell Block C. Diana's status in the prison hierarchy shifted overnight. Inmates who'd ignored her before now nodded respectfully when she passed. Gang leaders from other blocks sent cautious messages through intermediaries, testing whether the new power player was interested in alliances or territorial agreements. Diana rejected all overtures. She wasn't interested in running gangs or controlling territory. She just wanted to serve her time in peace, with the respect that came from demonstrated capability. That night, lying on her bunk with Ashley snoring softly in the bed below, Diana reflected on how quickly things had changed. Yesterday, she'd been nobody. Today, she was the most respected inmate in Cell Block C, possibly in the entire facility. But respect earned through violence was a double-edged sword. There would always be someone looking to make their reputation by taking down the top dog. Young inmates eager to prove themselves, older cons feeling disrespected, gang leaders from other facilities who might transfer in with something to prove. Diana had bought herself space and time, but she'd also painted a target on her back that would follow her for the rest of her sentence. The question wasn't whether someone else would challenge her. The question was when and whether they'd be smart enough to learn from Ray's mistake. The first test arrived on a Tuesday morning during breakfast service. A massive inmate named Titanium walked directly to Diana's table, her arms covered in teardrops and spiderweb tattoos that told stories of decades behind bars. At 6 feet tall and 270 pounds of solid muscle, Titanium represented everything the prison system could forge from raw human material. "Heard you think you're some kind of badass," Titanium announced, her voice carrying across the cafeteria. Conversation stopped as inmates turned to witness what appeared to be the next chapter in Diana's violent saga. Diana continued eating her oatmeal, never looking up from her tray. "Just trying to do my time in peace, sister." "Peace?" Titanium laughed, the sound echoing off concrete walls. "You put Rays in the infirmary and think that brings peace. You declared war on every crew in this place, and now they're looking to me for answers." This was the moment Diana had been expecting. Prison hierarchies demanded constant reinforcement through demonstrations of power. Her victory over Rays had created a vacuum that needed filling, and nature abhors a vacuum. "Rays disrespected me," Diana said quietly, finally meeting Titanium's eyes. "I gave her a chance to walk away. She chose violence. And now I'm choosing violence," Titanium replied, cracking her knuckles with sounds like breaking branches. "Stand up, Marine. Time to see if you can handle a real opponent." The cafeteria held its breath as Diana slowly pushed back from the table. Her movements remained unhurried, deliberate. But inmates who'd witnessed the yard fight recognized the subtle shift in her posture. The predator was awakening. "You sure about this?" Diana asked, rising to her full height. Even at 250 pounds, she looked smaller compared to Titanium's massive frame. "Because once this starts, it doesn't stop until one of us can't continue." Titanium's response was immediate and brutal. Her right fist whistled through the air where Diana's head had been a millisecond earlier. But Diana had already moved, reading the telegraph punch and stepping inside Titanium's reach with fluid precision. What followed wasn't the wild brawl most inmates expected. It was a clinical demonstration of how proper training could overcome size and strength advantages. Diana worked Titanium's body like a surgeon, targeting pressure points and nerve clusters with strikes that looked gentle but carried devastating effect. Titanium swung again, her massive arms creating hurricane force, but Diana flowed around the attacks like water around stone. Each missed punch left Titanium slightly off balance, creating openings that Diana exploited with ruthless efficiency. The end came suddenly. Titanium overcommitted to a haymaker that would have decapitated most women, but Diana ducked under the swing and drove her elbow upward into Titanium's armpit. The strike hit the brachial plexus perfectly, sending lightning bolts of nerve pain down Titanium's right arm. As Titanium stumbled, Diana caught her weakened arm and applied a standing armbar that hyperextended the elbow joint beyond its natural range of motion. The sound of cartilage separating was audible throughout the silent cafeteria. Titanium's scream echoed off the walls as she dropped to her knees, her right arm hanging useless at her side. Diana maintained the hold for exactly 3 seconds longer than necessary, ensuring every witness understood the message being delivered. "Like I said," Diana spoke into the silence, "just trying to do my time in peace." She released Titanium's arm and returned to her table, finishing her oatmeal while medical staff rushed to assist the writhing giant. The entire encounter had lasted less than 90 seconds, but its impact would resonate for months. Ashley watched from their table with wide eyes, her breakfast forgotten. "Girl, you just took down Titanium. That's impossible. She's been the enforcer for the Black Widows for 6 years." Diana shrugged, sipping her coffee like nothing had happened. "Size doesn't matter when technique is perfect. Marines taught me that on my first day of combat training." But Diana knew this victory would bring new challenges. Titanium's defeat had effectively neutered another gang's enforcement capability, creating more power vacuums in the complex web of prison politics. Other gangs would move to fill the void, testing boundaries and challenging authority. More importantly, word of Diana's capabilities was spreading beyond the walls of Riverside Women's Correctional. In maximum security facilities across 3 states, shot callers were having conversations about the Marine who was dismantling established hierarchies with surgical precision. Diana Rivera served the remaining 18 months of her sentence without another serious challenge. Word had spread through every prison network in the region that Cell Block C housed a predator who moved like death itself. Gang leaders from other facilities made sure their transferred members knew the rules. Respect the Marine, give her space, and never mistake her quiet demeanor for weakness. When her release day finally arrived, Diana walked through those gates carrying the same weathered duffel bag she'd brought in, but something fundamental had changed during her time inside. The warrior who'd felt lost in civilian life had rediscovered her purpose through the crucible of prison violence. She'd learned that respect wasn't about the uniform you wore or the battles you'd fought overseas. It was about how you carried yourself when everything was stripped away except your character and your training. Diana Rivera had entered Riverside Women's Correctional as a broken veteran drowning in regret. She left as a woman who understood that some battles choose you, and the only question is whether you're prepared to fight them with honor. 6 months later, she opened a martial arts academy in San Antonio, teaching young women that true strength comes from discipline, not violence. Her students never knew about her time in prison, but they learned the same lessons she'd taught Ray's Johnson and Titanium that first week inside. Never judge a warrior by her appearance.